This is Global Order. I am Hindol Sengupta. My friend Come Carpentier de Gourdon is with me today. Usually, I get Come to talk about European politics, which is one of his key areas of research. He's really, in a sense, a bridge analyst, having seen, of course, he's European, he's French, and of course, with a long, more than 30, 40-year connection with India. But today, I actually have invited Combe to talk to me about one of his favorite subjects, which he's been researching for many decades now, UFOs. Now, UFOs, of course, make us, immediately make us think about E.T. and Spielberg films and this, that, and the other. But there is a lot of interesting research emerging in this area. And today we're in the world where we're really talking about, multi-planetary human life and also extraterrestrial life once again in a very focused way. Especially Elon Musk keeps talking about it. We'll talk about all that with Combe. Combe, welcome.
Greetings. How are you, Hindol?
I like the way you said greetings, Combe. It was almost as if an extraterrestrial life would say to Earth, greetings, human beings.
Setting the tone.
Well, welcome, very welcome, Combe. Always a delight and a pleasure to have you. Take us through the background to give us context, Combe. You've been interested in this subject for many, many years. Why have you been interested in the subject? What has your research shown?
As you know, this is a huge topic, and since we don't have unlimited time, I have to be very brief. Otherwise, just introducing the background for my interest would take the whole show. As a child, I was told early in life by my father that there were such things. In fact, we lived in the Canary Islands until I was almost 6 years old, and there had been some sightings there. I'm talking about the early 60s. But he told me that even earlier in the 50s, he was briefed by an agency of the French government, along with a number of other reporters and writers, that there was such a phenomenon, and that it was probably extraterrestrial, but that anybody who wrote for the press was expected to keep it discreet and not to make a fuss about it because it might scare people. So there was an element of social responsibility in keeping things low-key. And as the Robertson panel of the CIA had recommended, try to make fun of it, make it a light topic, but we know they are there. Now, I could go much further back into history. We know that in the 17th century, 16th century, and also in the Middle Ages, there were not only stories from chroniclers, but also illustrations of objects in the sky and even of battles in the sky. And these have been documented, they are available. It's just that it was considered probably some imagination or some misinterpretation of natural phenomena. But in fact, we see that there were pretty precise accounts of craft that appeared to be made by an intelligent organization, and that so some of those craft were in fact even had people on board. Now, I can't go into that. I mean, you could go into antiquity and beyond, but let's say that in the last several years, a lot of phenomena have taken place. In fact, reports about them cover millions of pages. We probably have at this time in the world, even if you count those who have died recently in the last 10 years, say, you probably would have about 50 to 60 million first-person witnesses. Some of them highly placed, pilots, astronauts, people from the government, from the military. And of course, in particular, what we are seeing now, just to cut to the chase, we are seeing a huge wave of so-called drones. And it's very interesting that since the powers that be didn't quite know how to qualify these objects, for many years they were known as UFOs or ovnis in the Latin countries. Then UAP was brought in supposedly by the Pentagon or the CIA. And now, of course, there are other terms such as, I mean, they are not even, they call them visitors, they call them, in fact, the term used by the CIA was unknowns because there is a memo from Kennedy to Khrushchev saying that 1962-63, so shortly before his assassination, saying that we should have a coordinated effort to identify unknowns so that we don't make a mistake and launch a nuclear war in error. So these are very, very official, and everything that I'm saying here is not some writing by some individual person. It is actually very authenticated government documents. So if you look at today's events, which are drawing so much attention, especially in the West and especially in the United States, you see that there are literally thousands of objects that are routinely called drones. And why do they do that? Well, because that's the only way to account for something which is flying and which is generally lit up or sometimes goes dark, but is perhaps too small. Well, it's certainly too small to be a conventional plane or a helicopter, and yet is too big to be the kind of pocket drones that we use, you know, the four propeller drones that most people now can buy over the counter. So naturally, here we see, and here I'm first going into the political aspect of it, because irrespective of what is really happening or what you believe is happening, the fact is that the US government has given an unprecedented show of disarray, miscommunication, and embarrassment, because they have provided a number of different explanations which are contradictory, and they have shown either they are completely nonplussed about it, or they are just trying desperately to hide something which they have been trying to hide for a very long time. You probably, if you have followed even minimally the reports that are going in various US TV channels and in so many internet chat and podcast channels, you will see that the government first said, well, we don't know what they are and we can't do anything about them. Then they said, well, there's nothing much about it. It's probably mostly private drone operators and maybe some foreign entity. Then they say, no, it can't be a foreign entity because we know they are not. And they are not ours in the sense that they are not from either the military or any government agency. But then, you know, we are not shooting them down because probably many of them are sort of misunderstood in the sense that they just may be stars or planes that people take to be drones. Then they say, well, we can't really shoot them down because we have regulations against that. You know, what if we shoot a drone and the drone is carrying some package from Amazon, or maybe some operator is having fun? Yet these drones, most of the time, go over very protected military and security installations. In fact, one of the big fusses began when they were flying all over Lakenheath, which is one of the primary military bases in Britain, which is used by the US. And recently, the US have moved their nuclear weapons in order to be ready for a possible confrontation with Russia. So you could see the drones coming in, which is a very frequent pattern that these so-called drones, which, by the way, in most cases do not look like drones, are quietly and very sort of consistently surveying and watching all sensitive military installations and nuclear power plants. They have been over them many, many times. It has been recorded, it has been filmed, and yet, to the best of our knowledge, they have never been shot down. Now, why that is so is not something that the government is able to explain. You know, they say, well, we have laws against that, which is simply not true, because if an unidentified craft is going over a high security installation, you are, of course, supposed to shoot it down, or you should at least bring it down by taking over the control system, which is what is routinely done. But in this case, you cannot do it because they simply do not respond to any technology that we have to bring them down. And likewise, they are not to be shot down because they move away far too quickly to be targeted. And in cases where people have tried to come close, either in planes or helicopters or in individual drones, that is, human piloted drones, these craft have simply moved away very quickly, or at night they have switched off the lights and have become unrecognizable or unreachable. So all that tells you that they are simply not drones, unless there is some very sophisticated drone that has been built in secret somewhere. And that has been one of the government's excuses, that, we have some things that we can tell you about, but they are very sophisticated. However, these are probably not what we see, so then you see the complete confusion. And so we are at the point where...
Let me ask you, so you're obviously painting a very interesting picture of what's going on today and the sightings today. But I think in the beginning of when you began to speak, you spoke about some very interesting instances in the past, even in the 16th, 15th centuries. Talk to us a little, talk to our audience a little bit about those. Because, of course, the assessment, as you correctly said, a lot of people feel that this is either imagination or somebody saw some natural occurrence and didn't quite understand, and therefore they thought this was something extraterrestrial. But you're saying there is evidentiary material available, which can be in a sense correlated over many, many hundreds of years, and if the same thing occurs again and again, perhaps there is some correlation somewhere. Give us some of these historical instances so that we develop a context of what we're talking about.
You see, you could go back to the scriptures of many religions. In India, you have the Vimanas in the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and in many other scriptures, and Itihasas. In other countries, you have a number of very interesting texts. Right from Japan to pre-Columbian America, you have a number of stories that report the arrival and the visits of certain beings that in some cases looked human, and in other cases did not. Now, all this has been generally put in the folder of legend, mythology, and therefore it didn't attract much serious attention. Even if you look at the Bible, when they tell you that some angels revolted against their Lord, and they were brought down by the faithful angels led by Archangel Michael, and they were sort of locked up, they tell you, down beneath the surface of the earth, where at some point they may come out again. And their ruler is the so-called Prince of Darkness, Satan or Lucifer. By the way, this has led a lot of Christian Americans, but not only Americans, Christians all over the world, to think that some of the phenomena we are watching today all over the world are possibly of demonic origin. And that explains the reluctance and the aversion that many Orthodox thinkers in the Semitic, you might say in the Abrahamic fold, feel towards these creatures. The same does not apply to civilizations like the Indian one, where there is an acceptance that there are all sorts of life forms in the universe and that there are other worlds, and therefore, if they are here, that seems to be in the nature of things. In the West, we have a very different attitude, and especially in America, there is genuine paranoia, at least at the official level, which explains why they have desperately tried to hide whatever they could not really deny. So then they said, well, we are watching it. In fact, that's what they're saying now. We are taking this very carefully, very seriously. We are analyzing it, but we think there is nothing much there. However, they give classified briefings to select members of the executive and of the legislative. Every president, when he comes to power, is briefed. And in fact, when President Trump was asked a few days ago whether he had been briefed, he said, I won't comment on that. So we know he was briefed at the beginning of his first term, and he has spoken about it several times on television and said that he obviously could not repeat what he had been told because everybody who is given some information at a certain level is sworn to secrecy. Therefore, there is some element of mystery there, and which explains why most people are completely in the dark about it, and there is an endless amount of speculation that goes on. As you know, in America, one of the theories which got a lot of legs is that the US government was afraid they had lost some very sensitive nuclear material, and they were trying to find it. And that's why they were sending all those drones to locate whatever they were looking for. Now, that doesn't make sense if you think of it. There is no question there are many drones that come from probably government agencies, simply because they are trying to find the others, you see? So you can see this kind of ballet being craft which are not demonstrably of official earthly origin, or at least human origin. And then you have more conventional craft that are looking for them. And we have even traced, there have been very interesting reports on how some US military planes have been going in circles and going through very intricate patterns over the ocean. Why? Because a lot of those unknown craft have come out of the ocean, both on the west and east coast. And from the ocean, then they fly over the land. They apparently conduct a number of exercises. They sit silent for hours and hours in one place. Then they zip back and forth. And they change shapes, which is very interesting. They change appearance. And when they disappear, they probably go back to where they came from, which is under the oceans, which is why they cannot be tracked. Beyond the point, the traces are lost. This is all official. It's not somebody speculating. It is completely recognized and accepted, which leads the government, to make a long story short, to eventually say, well, listen, we can't really tell you what they are, but we'll try to find an explanation. And eventually, of course, they will find some cock and bull story. I think they will, but I don't think many people will believe it now because, of course, lots of people want to be reassured. So they'll believe anything that makes them feel good. But there is such a lot of distrust about the US government and about other governments in the world that most people are very, very skeptical about whatever the government says. And they often are willing to attribute, especially the US government, some nefarious designs. This is one reason why Trump was elected, by the way, in the hope that he would clean up the mess and bring a lot of things to light, which he promised to do. We don't know if he will, but apparently, you know, his statement last week was, I think the government who knows what these things are should make a clean breast of it. They shouldn't keep hiding it because it is destroying whatever credibility they have left. So they should share it with the public. And of course, he won't do it because he's under a gag order, at least not as long as he's not the president. So he is giving them the responsibility of telling the truth. But I very much doubt that they will.
Let's talk a little bit about how all of this is also connected to, say, Elon Musk and others' vision of a multi-planetary life for human beings. This is something that Musk talks about all the time. There is this entire thing about the race between the United States and China to, in a sense, colonize Mars, put up the first human colonies there. How does all of this interact, Cole?
You see, Elon Musk is definitely somebody who is supported by some very powerful interests to get to where he is. You know, you can't expect an individual coming from a wealthy background, but nothing exceptional, to, within a few years, take that position where he's now literally the president of the United States, or at least will be with Trump. So there is something going on there, which is very clearly what you might call an operation from the deep state, somewhere within the deep state, which means the permanent aspect, the permanent part of the US government, and something which is probably larger than the US government, which is essentially a supranational government that is already operating, at least in certain respects. So what you see with the Musk is the plan to gradually disclose a number of things that have been kept hidden from the public. And here of course, I'm going out on a limb, but let's face it, too many people are saying it in very high positions, not to actually at least pay respect to what is very likely to be true. Basically, there is a secret space program, which has been going on for a very long time, probably for at least 40 years. And that space program has gone very much farther ahead and away than what we know officially from space agencies such as NASA. So according to what we are hearing from a number of sources, including General Chaim Eshed, who was the head of the Israeli military space agency for many years and who is now 87, he wrote it in a book that came out last year. And he said what many others have said, including very high-level officials in certain governments, that there are already bases on Mars, which have been created with the assistance of certain non-human agencies, non-human intelligence organizations, and that these bases, just as on the moon, have been used to already seed human expansion into the solar system and beyond. And as a result, what you are hearing from NASA is essentially a surface coverage of whatever they can say. You see, whatever else is going on is not done by NASA. It's probably done by military agencies, and they have gone very far in that direction. However, there is a point where you have to come up with the facts because you are getting to another stage of development. And that's when Elon Musk comes up, because he says, I'm going to go to Mars and I'll bring a lot of people to Mars. But the fact that he's setting such a close time horizon tells you that there is a lot that has already been done, and that he's essentially acting as an instrument, as a voice bearer, to make it public and to make it civilian.
I have a question, Kum. I mean, you're essentially saying that Musk's rise itself is somehow connected to, supranational agencies and so on and so forth. But interestingly, Musk himself rails against the so-called deep state all the time. Is there a contradiction there?
It could be a good cover, because remember, there are opposing forces or factions within the international and the national authorities. So you can expect him to fight certain forces which are not necessarily in favor of what has been done or what he's doing. And in that sense, he has come together with Trump to break through a veil of break through a veil of secrecy which has been hanging over a lot of things in the last many years. By the way, this has been said by some very prominent people, and some proof has been given too. You see, there is a gradual information release process going on, and it comes from certain factions of the intelligence community, such as the CIA and others, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Reconnaissance Office, and there are several of these agencies, and many of which are not even named and should not be mentioned because they are completely dark. They are deep above top secret. Now, it's very interesting that Tulsi Gabbard has now been placed in charge of the entire intelligence community because she's known to be in favor of information release, and therefore she's probably going to be an agent for draining the swamp and for bringing a lot of things out, if she has her way. We don't know if she will, but if she has her way, and clearly Trump appointed her for that purpose. So what you have here is a gradual release of information. For example, one of the highly qualified, high-level intelligence agents such as David Grush, in the last few months has come up with a lot of information. He has given it under oath to Congress, and Congress has been therefore briefed. And one of the things he said is, I'm authorized to reveal certain things, not others. For example, I can say that one of the earliest craft, not of earthly origin, that came into the US possession was a craft that fell in Italy in Magenta in 1933. And once it fell, it was in the possession of the Italian government. We have the telegrams from Mussolini about it. We know that Marconi was in charge of the investigation of that technology, the man who invented radio communication and many other things. And we know that the Germans got into it once they started collaborating with the Italians before and during World War II. And we know that the Vatican, after the fall of the fascist regime, the Vatican got hold of this craft and transferred it to the US. Now, this has been officially released by the CIA, and we have a lot of our documented interactions with extraterrestrial beings and craft that are now being given to the public in the sense that they are put on the internet and they are written about, they are published with due accreditation and sources. Of course, there are factions within the government that will keep denying everything and saying, no, we don't have any comment on this, we have nothing to say, you people can think what you want. But the cat is out of the bag, and clearly at least one faction in the government wants it to be out because they feel it's become impossible to hold it back. Simply because if you have isolated UFO incidents, let's put it this way, where some people see a craft and they even see the people who are inside, well, they report it. Generally, they are dismissed as kooks. The police may make a report on it, and there are some newspaper articles. Maybe somebody will write a book about it. You know, there are almost 5,000 books that have been published about UFOs in the last 60, 70 years. And then it will be forgotten and people will go on with their lives. But now you have a wave of so-called drones, which has forced the Americans to close some of their bases, to close some of their airports temporarily, and to say that they simply have no control over this and they don't know what to do about it. So that tells you that when there is such a mass awareness that everybody can sort of film this craft moving around in the sky and sometimes coming very low above the treetop, then you know that you can no longer hide it. So at this point, how do you make a clean breast? Remember, in the case of the US government and others, they have been lying about it for 80 years, at least. So now you have to say, well, we lied because we just didn't want you to know because we felt it was something that would disturb you. You see, clearly you have a very contradiction with the theory of an open government and of a democracy, because you have a group of people who have decided that they should know and use whatever they know to their own ends, and that the public shouldn't be informed because they are better kept ignorant. Now, this in itself shows that the Constitution of the US in that one particular case has been violated. But let me insist on the fact that this is not a US phenomenon. It is happening in so many different countries. In the last 1 month, we have had reports from 30 countries, including India, about sightings of these craft. So to think that there are suddenly thousands of UFOs all over the world and that they are all somehow made and launched by pranksters or by God knows whom, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Of course, some people in the US have tried to say, well, it comes from China. But remember, the Chinese also have had to close some of their airports in the last few weeks because of the same kind of problem. They have had the same kind of drones flying and staying for hours over certain sensitive locations. So if the Chinese are doing it to the Americans, they are doing it to themselves. And then how can the Chinese launch thousands of drones from where to reach the US and go over the entire continental US? Because it's not only near the coastlines. You have also seen them in Montana, in Michigan, in Texas. You know, this is something which is
Let me ask you
nationwide.
something about China then, Com. And this is going to be I'm glad you mentioned China. This was going to be my last question, which is, where does China fit into all of this? You know, do you think the Chinese have a response to this? Do you think they have certain awareness? Do you think the Chinese have certain intelligence? And of course, since we're talking, sitting in India, has there been Indian responses to this?
The Chinese have a lot of information. And in fact, I was 3 weeks ago, I was in Hong Kong at a fairly high-level meeting. And I mentioned this whole issue because somebody else had brought it up. And the Chinese intelligence people who were there kept very quiet, but they didn't contradict a single point I made, including the fact that the CIA has issued a number of reports on what the Chinese are doing about UFO technology. We have seen the cables. Some of these cables were either leaked or intercepted, and they come from CIA agents who are reporting on some of the Chinese advanced research into this. Now, that tells me the Chinese are definitely trying to beat the Americans at their own game. They are trying to get as much information as they can, but they are no more capable of controlling the phenomenon than the Americans are. And if you take into account the fact that the Americans have had contacts, interactions with some of the alien beings, for lack of a better word, let's call them alien beings. They are also under the sea. They are in various underground facilities here on Earth. So they may not all come from outer space, although they clearly can go into outer space from everything that we see. So the question is, the Chinese know, but they obviously will talk as little as possible. And as far as India is concerned, I have tried for a few years. First was about 15 years ago with the late Ashok Parthasarathi, whom you probably remember. He was a science advisor to Indira Gandhi. We together wrote to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh about what was happening, because we had done some reports on this. And in fact, I did a podcast for India Foundation about 10 years ago on this, maybe a little less. And the fact is that the scientists who were consulted by the PMO, we were told, had said, well, there is not much to be said about it. We don't know about it. Maybe these are all misunderstood phenomena, and it's better not to raise the issue because it's a hot potato, and the Americans may not like we doing that. Remember, this was a time when negotiations were going on over the nuclear deal. So clearly, you have a core of very conservative Indian scientists who don't really want to go where no one has trodden before here, you see. But I am told at the military level, this is a national security issue, and whatever is known is not going to be talked about, at least for the time being, you know. But then I suspect, I could be wrong, but I suspect India doesn't know as much as some other countries, including the US, UK, France, Israel, China, Japan, know about it, simply because one of the jobs of the leading powers was to keep everybody else in the dark so that they could gain a decisive strategic advantage. You see, this is not about the kind of people who are in power are not wanting to share this for the benefit of humanity. They just want to see what benefit they can get from it to make their country stronger. And the US definitely has a completely imperial mindset, and they feel that whatever they can gather will make them even stronger and keep them as the kingmaker and as the overlord of humanity. That is the fact, whether we like it or not.
Fascinating. This would definitely go down as one of the most fascinating topics we've discussed on Global Order, Com. Thanks very much. No doubt there will be much to talk about as this phenomena grows and as people like Musk push towards a multi-planetary existence for mankind. We will, as you said, with the existence of Musk and Tulsi Gabbard and perhaps also President Donald Trump, perhaps get to know more about this phenomena, including from other countries. Thanks very much for your time, Com. Appreciate it.
Welcome.